You're listening to Through Help and Back. Through Help and Back is a podcast focused on mental health, addiction, treatment, recovery, and all things related to personal improvement and wellness. Don't worry, we're not here to talk about problems without solutions, and we're definitely not here to talk about struggles without success. So come with your problems, leave with our solutions. So, Caitlin, I appreciate you coming on today for sure. I definitely have been going through your content, and we'll talk a little bit later about how people can find you and make sure that they can access, all the great stuff that you're putting out there. But if you want, we'll kind of work backwards. Do you want to give a little bit of a summary of, some of the content you've been putting out on Instagram and other platforms, and kind of what inspired you to do that?
Absolutely. So my Instagram page, Cait's Wings, all originated with my desire to have a creative outlet. I've always loved writing since I was a little kid. My mom even said I should work for Hallmark, the card company. I can be really mushy sometimes, but as during my journey of healing and finding myself and what I like to do, I wanted to step out of my comfort zone, and I figured social media is the outlet these days. So that's what I decided to do. And my platform really is just to shed light on mental health and on different emotional experiences that people can go through, whether that be grief or sadness, anger, whatever it is. I want to shed light on those things and use my writing as a tool to touch other people. So that's what my platform is.
That's awesome. So when you talk about those different range of emotional experiences, he says sort of anger and sadness and just kind of whatever they want to emote and whatever they want to put out there and feel, you want to provide a platform that they might be able to kind of connect with. Is there any particular range of emotions that got you started? Like, were you feeling anger, sadness, or depression? Like, what was it that got you started with that?
Burnout. So I was in the midst of grad school and the intensities of studies, and I'm studying biomedical sciences, and I plan on going into the medical field. So most people know that that's a pretty intense area of study that is nonstop. And I was just experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome, self-doubt, lack of confidence. And it took me some time to realize, well, this door wouldn't have opened for me if I wasn't capable of actually being here and doing this. So I was, experiencing a lot of anxiety, and I wanted to be able to put that anxious energy and turn it into something relatable, something that people can connect with. So that's pretty much where it all started from.
Gotcha. And that is amazing. I mean, that's not exactly some light hobbies that you're talking about. Those are some serious academic endeavors. A lot of times when people are kind of drawn to those types of fields, that imposter syndrome doesn't necessarily start like kind of at that moment. It's something where there's been like achievement, or you've been labeled as a high achiever or intelligent. Is that, yeah? So have you been carrying that around for a while?
Oh, absolutely. I've always considered myself a perfectionist. So with perfectionism comes the expectations that others start to have for you. And I've always kind of been a people pleaser, and the expectations I've had developed for myself kind of included the expectations that I thought other people had around me. So that's kind of why I was experiencing a lot of pressure, not just for myself, but from what I perceived other people to think. Yeah.
Okay, so classic easy therapist thing to do. We'll start right in that childhood, right? So when you said you kind of identified as a perfectionist, is that something even as a young child you felt, or is that something you felt like was assigned to you? Like, when did you first become aware of these feelings of perfectionism?
Definitely around middle school, when I started to care more about my grades. That was when I moved to a different school, and it was a college preparatory school. So the workload was a lot more intense for each grade level. So even at fifth grade, I was doing a lot of studying. And once I was in that college preparatory environment where I felt like, okay, everything I do kind of matters for my future, even though I wasn't consciously aware that I was thinking that, it was somewhere deep down that I was starting to become aware of, okay, I have to work hard. And I come from a family like women of educators, women who worked in education. And so I've always taken my education very seriously and putting my best, I was always taught to put my best foot forward, not necessarily making A's all the time, but more of just making sure that I'm putting my best effort. And I think that work mentality led to the perfectionism that I have.
Gotcha. So tell me a little bit more about that. You said family of educators. So, like, what is your family background? Like, where are you from, and what was and who was family to you growing up?
Yes, so I am from Houston, Texas. Some people know that as like Rockets, the basketball team, or where Beyonce is from. I love Beyonce. Yeah, she's from Houston. So growing up, it was my brother. I have an older brother. He's a few years older than me. My mom, my grandmother and grandpa, and my dad. And it was really just a smaller family unit. I have a big family, but who I consider to be my close family, that's really who was involved in my life. And so, um, my mom, she is an educational consultant. She works with a lot of schools that need assistance with making sure they're providing students the resources that they need, whether it's if they have like a health condition that's impairing their learning, anything like that. So ever since a young age, my mom always taught me like how to study. We were really old school. We would make note cards and write stuff on the note cards and play matching games. And I still use note cards to this day. So yeah, and my grandmother, she was a teacher and she's retired, but she still volunteers and goes back to schools and teaches and substitutes. So I have women in my family who take education very seriously, but it's not more of like about specific grades. It's more about using it as an opportunity to open more doors for you, like in the future. So
So
yeah.
not about that like immediate achievement. It's more about like future opportunities. And if you can add to your learning and you can show yourself as an adept learner or researcher, then the future will be brighter because those opportunities will come because of that. That's interesting. And what was Dad's role in all this? Was he also in education?
My dad, so he was a Marine Corps veteran.
Okay, here comes the discipline. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So he served in the military before he met my mom. And then he also worked as in like firefighting and things like that. So after he got out of the military, he did various things. And my parents got divorced when I was a kid, but my dad was still much very heavily involved in my life. There was a lot of co-parenting, which I'm very lucky and blessed to have been able to have that because sometimes with family separation that can lead to some difficulties, and I'm sure other people can relate to that. So yeah, he worked in a family business, an auto supply, so that's what he did. And yeah, my biggest cheerleader. So yeah. Yeah.
So you have both sides of it there a little bit. So obviously, education is a key priority. With that going on, I mean, how do you balance that in terms of like laying the foundation for future achievement or putting your best foot forward, as you say, and just the normal, like, be a kid stuff, what was like fun and friends and just like social interaction? How was that for you, balancing that with like, we're preparing you for what's to come? Were you able to do both?
During my early childhood, I was less concerned with school, even though like I had a lot of like that upbringing and discipline. But I had a huge imagination. I played outside. I had all of those like really good childhood experiences. And then when I did reach middle school and started taking things a little bit more seriously, I still enjoyed my group of people and tried to um, however, because of the perfectionism, I also was really hard on myself. And sometimes that critical voice that I had in my head took me away from the present moment. So sometimes I couldn't really enjoy myself during, like, if it was a school dance or if I got invited for a sleepover, there was always like thoughts in my head kind of critiquing me. And even when no one was telling me anything. So it was most likely anxiety. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you use that word, I mean, you say most likely anxiety. Is that something that as you've grown older, you feel is part of your story, is dealing with anxiety?
Absolutely. Definitely from a young age, I feel like I've always been quite an anxious person. I tell people that my default setting is anxiety. I'm just always very on edge, and it takes me a lot of effort and energy to check in with myself and make sure, okay, how am I feeling right now? Am I too tense? Like maybe I need to just breathe. But, it wasn't until maybe really college that I came to terms with what was going on and started to have a little bit more awareness of, oh, that's what that is. That explains the physical freaking out and like the heart pounding, the tightness in the chest and all that, the physical symptoms of anxiety that I was experiencing for years. I didn't quite understand what was going on, but as I got older, I started to gain a little bit more knowledge.
That's interesting because one of the things we've talked about on this podcast is sort of the generational divide, right? And so like when I was in school, we heard none of these words like depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and so those just weren't even discussed. It wasn't even like a shame thing where they were discussed and then like, oh, that's crazy. It just wasn't talked about, right? Like you could be sad, but you that never was like you're depressed, right? You could be nervous, but it wasn't like you're suffering from anxiety. It seems like that's changed over the years. So like, was that in your awareness, like that anxiety, it was a potential situation, or were you just sort of unaware of that? And as you learn more, you're like, oh, now looking back, that does seem to be like what I was dealing with. It's like retroactive.
Yeah, I would say during my adolescent years, I didn't have a lot of the technical awareness, like you were saying, having specific diagnoses or words attached to emotions. I just knew at the time, I just knew I was feeling bad or I was experiencing some type of panic. I just didn't always have the words to describe what was going on. And so when I got to college, I chose to study psychology. And that was when I started to become more aware of, there are actual things that people experience. And interestingly, like in middle school, because I was experiencing, anxiety, even though I didn't know what was anxiety, that actually what sparked my passion for mental health because I knew something was going on. I just didn't know what. So, yeah.
So how would that impact you? Like, you talk about some of the physical feelings, but, did it get in your way or was it just sort of how life was? What was your experience of growing up and how might that have been changed by virtue of having to deal with those symptoms?
I would say, although I experienced a lot of anxiety attacks and panic, I was still very high functioning, or what people would call high functioning. I got good grades. I turned my assignments in. I smiled. I appeared fine on the outside, right? A lot of people wear masks. And I think during my adolescent years, because I was a huge perfectionist, I put the pressure on myself to appear that everything was all together. But deep down, there was a lot of panic, a lot of fear. And so I would say it did block me in some ways because it was like I was my biggest critic, my biggest enemy, even though I should have been more like on my own side. And for example, I can think of a time when I was in a fashion camp. It was like a camp where you learn how to do fashion designs and learn about the fashion industry. And this was like in the 8th grade. And I just remember having moments where I would get so in my head. I was surrounded by my peers, and I get so in my head that I would have to excuse myself to go to the restroom and just sit in the stall freaking out. And then I would end up crying because I get so overstimulated and overwhelmed. And, that happened quite a lot, like during school, during dances, where I would have to excuse myself because I would get so critical in my head that I would just start freaking out. And so I will say that the anxiety definitely put some challenges for me in terms of actually enjoying adolescence and childhood.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of sad to think about it that way, because
Yeah, no, it is. It's just I always tell myself, well, even though I experience those difficulties, I know other people out there either are experiencing those things or have experienced them, and that's why I am so passionate about mental health, because I know that I wasn't alone and that I'm not alone. So yeah.
very much not. Yeah. I mean, it's the latest statistics is 1 in 5 people, at some point in their life will deal with that issue. And that doesn't even count the people who have loved ones who are dealing with it, right? Because if somebody you care about is dealing with it, it does affect you and you are aware of it and that stuff. So, and I think back to what you're saying about the masks and, what you know about Carl Jung and the persona and the masks. He would have a field day with you and sort of like this mask is, you're like, I'm smiling, like I'm perfect, I'm happy, like it's good. And inside it's like really churning. Did you discuss this with anybody at the time? Like, were your parents aware? Were your friends aware? Like, did you find support in those conversations, or was it just something you carried around by yourself?
For the most part, I tried to navigate those things on my own, because at the time I felt like when I did articulate what I was feeling, some individuals, whether it was friends or family, they kind of dismissed my experience. So they would say something like the classic, "You're too blessed to be stressed." I got that a lot. "You're too blessed to be stressed." Which I'm not saying that's a false statement. Yes, I am very blessed, but that doesn't take away the fact that I'm experiencing anxiety attacks. So, you know, um, or, I would be told that I need to calm down or that I need to get a grit. I just felt very misunderstood. And because of the misunderstandings, it made me want to kind of close up and just go quiet. And I spent many years just keeping things to myself, which isn't always healthy. Internalizing is not good.
Yeah, I would say it's rarely healthy, actually. So you say, you say not always. Like, I'm trying to think when that's a good idea.
Never a good idea. You're right.
Too blessed to be stressed, and so that's interesting because that would speak to what the idea that you have support or your family maybe has financial resources or whatever. So like, what do you have to complain about? Life is good for you, versus compare to this person or that person, and it's always such an interesting take because it's true. It's true that it could be worse, right? That whole phrase of like it could be worse. It's like, yeah, but it could also be better. We're always somewhere on that continuum. And just because they're dealing with that struggle does not mean my struggles are not real to me. When you use the word misunderstood, did it actually get to the point where you felt like dismissed when you would bring that up? Or was it just, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I felt very dismissed, and it did lead to a lot of frustration. And that frustration brewed and brewed, and I developed a lot of bitterness. And it took some time in my personal journey of healing to go back to those feelings and say, well, why did I feel that way? And why do I still feel this sense of not anger, but bitterness, and overcoming that? But I had to go back and like revisit those experiences that weren't so pleasant to figure out, okay, well, why? What is the why? So, yeah.
Were there specific experiences? I mean, you say, I get the general sense of what you were struggling with, but were there specific incidences of dismissal or misunderstanding that when you had to go back and reprocess, you're like, this was particularly impactful? Or was it more just sort of the day in and day out grind of having to deal with that without support?
Yeah, I would say that probably the most impactful experience with feeling like I was dismissed was with my mom. And we're like best buds. Yeah. So it was a journey for both of us because I was struggling, and no parent wants to see their child struggle. And because just in many families, mental health, there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of lack of knowledge, and how do you respond to these situations when your child is coming to you with these things. Um, my mom just was having a hard time digesting, and I think her response was what she was taught growing up. Like had like generational trauma, or stigma being passed down from generation to generation. So I really believe that dismissal was not because she wanted to be that way or wanted me to get my feelings hurt, but because that's how maybe her parents responded when she was having a hard time. So it took a journey for both of us to figure out, okay, well, how do we address the situation, and how do we work on communicating better with each other? And now she's learned a lot from me, and she's into mental health awareness, and she's grown a lot. So, a lot of people say that sometimes the struggle helps people grow closer. And I will say that she has put a lot, I'm very lucky. She's put a lot of effort in learning more about how to be a good support for me. And she is a great support for me and always has been. So, a journey, like I always say, it was a journey to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just as simple as go to therapy for like 2 or 3 sessions and then you get a couple tips and you're like, oh, that's it. Everything's fixed. Like generally, these experiences have been stacking up over years, right? And so it's a lot of process and a lot to deal with. And the old habits and the old behaviors and the old stigma, it's tough to shake. It's tough to not let that like come through from time to time. So I think you're very fortunate to have family members that went through it with you and make those adjustments to try to learn. I've worked with a lot of families where, people in their 40s to 50s are just like, my mom's never understood and she doesn't care to help. And, and they have a very fractured relationship for their whole life. Whereas actually this feels like something that has brought you guys closer together. So, it is good. When you talk about your healing journey. So was there a start to that? Was there like a moment of awakening where you're like, okay, this has to change and this is what I'm going to do about it? Like, how did you initiate, your journey, as you say?
So, during my last year in high school, my dad got really sick with colon cancer. And so he was hospitalized during my entire senior year in high school. Also, my grandfather got sick unexpectedly as well. So there was just a lot of family illness. And unfortunately, they both passed away that same year. So, about a month before moving to another city to start college, my dad passed away. And it was my experience with grief, or at least being introduced to grief, that is really what prompted me to say, you know what? I can't keep pretending anymore. This is a lot. Like this is a lot. I need to get a support system, and I need to process things, because during my senior year in high school, I couldn't process anything because I was busy with college applications. I was busy with trying to pass my classes. I was taking care of my dad. So it was just a lot going on. And that is what prompted my decision to say, I'm going to get help. I'm going to reach out to someone. And even then, during my first year in college, it still was a process to find the right therapist, to, click with somebody. And even then, you think, okay, I've been to a few sessions. I should be fine now. And then a few months pass and then you start feeling bad again. So you're like, okay, maybe I need to go back. So, that was experiencing grief and loss is what really prompted me to say, you know what, I got to do something.
No, and I think, and it's kind of, not that I know of a country that does it right, so to speak, but I know in America specifically, we have some tough ideas around grief. Even it shows up in our workplace, and it shows up in how we process, and it shows up in those time frames. You could lose a parent on a Wednesday, and be back to work by Monday. I mean, you have the funeral over the weekend and things, so, I mean, and that's a fully formed adult. I can't imagine going through that process as a teenager or somebody just into adulthood and dealing with that. So did you go into therapy when your father got sick or when your grandfather got sick, or was this after they passed?
This was after they passed. Yeah, that was when everything started. Yeah, that's when everything started hitting me all at once. And
right, you hold it off as long as you can, right? You try to stay strong, and then the water starts to wash over. And how was your grief, other than obviously feeling very sad? But I mean, how was it affecting your life that kind of signaled to you like, I need to get some assistance here? Was it causing impacts day to day, or was it just sort of how you were feeling as you thought about it? Okay, yeah, what'd that look like?
Yes. So out of bed was one of the most difficult things. Yeah, during college, my first year, I remember I would hear my alarm going off, but it always felt like a ton of bricks were sitting on my chest. And that was like the worst feeling because I'm a perfectionist. So I know, okay, you have class at this time, you have this assignment to do. I had all these work ethic expectations for myself, right? But physically and emotionally, my body was like, no, just NO, not happening. so so it affected, my first year of school. It wasn't fun and exciting. I felt a lot of confusion, and sometimes I felt empty and numb, and sometimes I felt angry, even like just so many emotions to the point where I'm like, I felt it physically, where I just felt a tightness in my chest. And I literally Googled, what is this? What I'm feeling a tight. Am I okay? Like, that anxiety around your health where you're like, okay, I'm feeling this physical symptom. What's going on? So it definitely it took a toll on me, but I still ended up doing fine in my classes, but that was only because that was only really because I reached out to my professors. If it wasn't for me being completely transparent with them, and that's my advice to a lot of people who are going into college, be honest, just be honest. And somebody out there, if they really care about your success, they're going to help you. And so it took a lot of humbling of myself to be like, you know what, I just need to be honest and not put on this facade. So that was hard. That was really hard.
Was that where does that come from? Because that's very brave. I'm thinking 19, away from home the first time, and you're like, I've got to get honest about maybe the toughest thing I've ever dealt with. Is that something you studied? Did that come from your classes, or is that just Caitlin? Is that something personal that you're like, I'm going to own up?
I believe that was what my mom taught me. Because during my senior year in high school, because my dad was sick, my grandpa was sick, she started, because she's an educator, she's like, no, I know this is a lot for her. I'm going to reach out to her teachers and make sure she has a support system at school. But she also allowed me to reach a point where I used my voice myself. And the teachers were there, and they were like, okay. And deep down, they already knew what was going on, but they just they were waiting for me to step up and say, hey, I need help. I need a safe space. And so it was really, I would say it was a lot of transformation that occurred from somebody being very hyper independent and perfectionistic. So yeah, but I think it just, everything that happened up to that point allowed me to develop into just being more vulnerable. And yeah.
I think, and obviously a very difficult way to learn it. But first thing I would say is, I think you probably learned more from that experience in your first year at college than you did in any class, right? Because you want to talk about reading about different, theories and psychological principles and things like that, and then to just actually go with coping and facing a real world situation that's making you feel a certain way. I just think that the development was probably off the charts. And then to be in a situation where, as a perfectionist, for whatever reason, and obviously very justifiable reasons, but somebody who's trying to put on this perception of perfection and I've got it all together, to be able to raise your hand and go, I don't have it all together. Like, it's the exact opposite direction that you had been building up all those years.
Polar opposite.
Yeah. So tell me about that. So you start to work with a therapist, and you said it took a little while to find the right fit. So how was that for you, and what was that experience like? Because I think a lot of people do that. They go to therapy and it's like it doesn't click right away, and they kind of give up. And so what was your experience, and what was your journey in finding the right person to work with like?
I will say my relationship or like experience with therapy was always on and off, because at a university they have like the student health center, which usually has like counseling component for students. And so you would get assigned to a therapist for maybe the semester.
I was going to say, they got like 4 therapists sitting down there for 20,000 students. And,
that therapist you would work with for maybe a few times that semester or entire school year. But then the next year you return and they wouldn't be there anymore. So I had to go through a lot of starting over, which was very frustrating, very, very frustrating. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the fact that when you are starting that initial session or just reaching out, you have to basically open up your whole book of life and say, hey, this is everything that's happened. I have to catch you up. And to do that again and again and again with someone completely different every year was quite exhausting. So I will say that because I've had multiple experiences, I know like what types of qualities I'm looking for when it comes to a therapist. Because I've had good experiences and then I've had not so good experiences. So I think even though it was kind of a roller coaster starting with someone new again and again and again, it allowed me to figure out, okay, who works for me and what works for me. So, yeah.
Do you mind to share what some of those are for you personally? You don't have to go too deep, but I wonder what the qualities you look for or respond to are. Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew Behavioral Health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com.
In a therapist, I am always going to look for someone who is authentic and honest. So they don't have to just sit there and be like, no, thank you. No, I don't want to feel like I'm talking to a wall or that I'm laying on a couch and they're, doing a deep psychoanalysis. I want to feel like I'm talking to a friend. That's really what I'm looking for, a safe space where I feel like that therapist is going to be honest with me and I can be honest with them, and it goes both ways. And it's like a collaboration rather than a one-way street type of deal. Yeah. And in terms of what I'm not looking for in a therapist, and is just maybe like from my past experiences, I had one person who was very expressive visually. So I would say something and they would just make a really shocked face. And because of my anxious mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, did I say, yeah, I was like, did I say something wrong? So that's the only thing is just having the good balance between being authentic, but not being so like overly reactive that I feel like I have to walk on eggshells. So,
It's so highly individualized and personalized too, because I mean, I'm obviously making jokes and making faces, but I'm certain there are people out there who want a highly expressive therapist because it brings the energy up and encourages them to come into the session and to share more and they can connect. And I think it's great that you have criteria, because one thing that I think is a common mistake is people like assume each therapist has this magic book of like all the answers, right? And it's like, well, this is who I got. And if I'm feeling weird about it, it must be my problem because they're a professional. And so I'm just going to adjust to them and deal with what they're doing. And, they must know best because they're sitting in the big chair and whatever the case may be. But it's really not. It's a dynamic and it is a relationship, and it's the interplay between the client and the therapist that really makes it work. And so if you're not feeling connected, it is okay to shop around and to look around, and like any other relationship, to go, this relationship isn't working for me, I'm going to find another one.
Yeah. I wish more people knew that it's okay. Yeah.
Me too. I really do. And I've had folks who've changed over to me. I've had folks who have left me. And other than like the first time it happens, I promise the therapists are not like feeling anything about it, right? Like I'm going to hurt their feelings or they're going to be mad at me, and so I'm glad you brought that up. So what is it, because in therapy, a lot of it is, taking a look at past behaviors, looking at where you've fallen short, developing and things like that. What is it like for a reformed or reforming perfectionist in therapy? I mean, how do you pull that mask down and get vulnerable and look at that kind of stuff? And it's kind of a weird kind of at odds dynamic,
I would say if someone is a perfectionist, then being honest and saying, okay, well, if I have all these expectations for myself and I want to put my best foot forward, then I have to be my best mentally, physically, spiritually, or whatever. I have to take the time to make sure that I'm doing okay so I can be the best I can be. So that to me is that just humbling oneself a little bit, and not in a like a mean way, just saying, hey, you know what, yes, I have all these expectations. Okay, in order for me to fulfill those expectations, if even, like, I need to make sure that I'm doing well enough to show up for myself. So that's kind of having, it's all about perspective, I should say. Telling yourself that, okay, being a perfectionist, sure, I can work on that, but just because I'm getting help doesn't mean I'm less worthy or less good or not doing enough. In fact, you learn from others. So it's okay to get the help you need and slow down.
A lot of your focus on your content is about people finding their voice and you finding your own voice. And so my first question was I was curious if you felt that perfectionism played a role in stifling your voice internally, right? Because if you didn't have like the perfect thing to say or the perfect thing to share, best not to share anything at all, or that constant evaluative, critical voice, not good enough, and it just sort of silences you. Or if that came from more outside sources that you felt didn't want to hear your voice. So was that more inside out or was that more outside in terms of stifling your voice early on?
Was a little bit of both. So kind of, as I talked about earlier, I was already an anxious individual. And so I already had that worried voice in my head that said, okay, well, what are they thinking? If I say this, how will they feel? How will they react? But I've, because of the being developed into a people pleaser at a young age, I did a lot of reflection, and I realized that the tendency to people please stems from wanting to be like accepted by others and wanting to avoid conflict and confrontation. Because as an anxious individual, you don't like confrontation. No, no, it makes you feel even more anxious. So at a younger age, I learned that, okay, if I just abide by what this person wants, then they'll like me or I will avoid conflict. And I think a lot of kind of just the interplay between the perfectionism, the anxiety, and the people pleasing silenced my voice because I had all these like back and forth thoughts in my head, like, oh, I can't say this, but I don't want them to get mad at me, so I have to do this, or I can't say no, it'll hurt their feelings, or all these things of worrying about other people and not really thinking about, well, what do I want to do? So, that was from a very young age and all the way up into my like young adult years. And it again, as I said, it's a journey to start to realize, okay, what is really causing me all this distress? Oh, I see. So yeah.
Were there instances when you were young of conflict that you like learned that conflict can be dangerous or uncomfortable, or is that just an internal sense of like, I don't even want to go there, I don't even like the thought of it, or was it?
I would say, like, as a young kid, seeing adults have disagreements or anything like that, or seeing conflict, and well, yeah, mostly adults, because kids are like sponges, right? You absorb everything. So I would say just seeing, some adults in my life have issues and communication problems, that I would say led to me maybe growing up feeling like, well, maybe I just need everybody to get along. Let's all get along, right? So I think that's probably where it stems from. It's just observing conflict from a young age and not knowing how to like respond. Like, yeah.
I mean, when you're 4 or 5 years old and like your parents argue and like these are the big superhumans that like are your whole world, and then they start to make a lot of loud noises and you're like, I can't do anything with this. You know what I mean? Like things are out of control, right? So it gets to feel very scary and dangerous. And I was just curious because you had mentioned your parents were divorced and things like that. So obviously the easy guess is, I wonder if there wasn't a little bit of conflict there that you saw that led to that relationship stuff. Yeah. So how does that look today? I mean, your progress, you say my healing journey. So what have been the improvements, and how is life better today, having gone through the therapy and the self-reflection and the studies? Like what's better today because of your work?
I will say, letting go of the perfectionism has been the biggest thing for me. Even with my page, I've been quite spontaneous. So if a creativity hits me all of a sudden and I'm writing a prose piece or poetry or something, I'm like, okay, I need to post this now. I don't even have a second thought. When old me would have been like, no, my writing is no good. I shouldn't share it with others. But now I'm like, no, let me share it. Somebody will like it, even if it's one person. So yeah, I will say my very first therapist, she taught me something that I still really hold close to my heart today. She taught me that your best will look different each day. And that is really what helped me address the perfectionism, is embracing the fact that your best is not going to be the same as yesterday's best. It's not going to be the same as tomorrow's best. Just know that you're doing the best you can. And that's all that matters. Don't compare yourself. Don't compare your yesterday self to your today self. Just focus on yourself for now. And that's really what's helped me a lot. So I'm really grateful to that therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's sort of a spin on that be here now, right? There is no past, there is no future, just be here now. You're always in that now. That's interesting. And I think another thing that's cool with that too is early on there were issues, you get nervous public speaking and things like that. Like people rate like public speaking as like the most stress-inducing experience ever, It's tough. But one of the thoughts that I was given is that you have to understand that they don't know what you meant to do, right? So if you put out a post and it's not perfect or exactly as you wanted it to be, your viewers or the people who receive your post, for all they know, that's exactly what you wanted to put out, right? So it's not like they have the script at home and go, oh, she missed this or she missed that, And the other piece of that is the more individual I think something is, the more universal it is, right? So it may be messy or maybe ugly, or say, but this is how I'm feeling today. You'll always be amazed at how many people respond to that and go, yes, that's that authenticity. That's exactly how I'm feeling too, And I think that can be very comforting to people when they realize they're not alone, that a lot of people are having similar experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all this personal stuff, I mean, you'd kind of hinted at earlier with like, majoring in psychology and wanting to understand that field better. I mean, have these personal experiences led you professionally? I mean, do you think they have a big influence on what you're doing today and what you're studying?
Absolutely. So my dream is to become a holistic psychiatrist. I know it's kind of a interesting combination.
Yeah, no, I want to hear more about it. Yeah.
So I always think about it like this. You can't put your best foot forward if something else is off. So whether it's like physically, mentally, spiritually, or whatever you want to consider, if something is off, then the other stuff will eventually fall apart too. So that's where kind of the holistic thing comes in, of just taking everything in as a whole. And the psychiatry part is I'm very interested in the brain. I find the brain fascinating. There's just so much we know about the human brain and so much we don't know. And with a lot of research, there's just a lot of research saying that both the biology of someone and also the environment that someone is in shapes their their being. So like mental health is not just a biological thing, it's also could be the environment that they're in that could be contributing. And so I just want to, because of my personal experiences for myself and my loved ones, I wanted to learn about it all. And yeah, and I also find that if I can be a doctor who is authentic and real, where someone comes to me and they're like, I trust this person, that's what I want. I want them to trust me, not, feel a little bit on edge about, do I really want to get, help from this person? So that's really what's led me to want to pursue what I want to pursue, because I want to help people. And I know everyone says that when they're going into medicine, I want to help people, but it's true. Like I want to help people have the best quality of life they can, no matter whatever that looks like or means. If that's something mentally or physically, I want to help guide them. But first, I have to learn about it. So, hence medical school and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw. I have to have Ian send this to you. I saw a clip the other day on Instagram. They were interviewing a young kid, and he said he wanted to be a doctor. And it was one of those like dumb street interviews when they were like, "How much money do you make?" That's like all they were talking about, And they like talked to some kid, and they were like, "What do you want to be?" And he said, "I want to be a doctor." And they said, "Well, what do you want to make? What do you want to make?" And he's like, "I want to make people feel better," And it's like, that's where it always starts. But you have to protect that for sure. So. Yeah. And we've had other guests on when you talk about that being able to connect, where people were dealing with like intense mental health struggles, and they would talk about seeing the top of the doctor's head and, tell me this, tell me this. Okay, here's your prescription. See ya, 5-10 minutes. And they were affected by that years later, about never took the time to understand like what was going on in my family or what was going on with me socially or all the other things that were happening. It was just like, here's the magic pill, right? And medication can play a really key role, but if that's the only thing, I think you're missing quite a bit. So
it's the connection that to me has the most impact on someone. So obviously, like you said, if someone needs the medication, it can help them a lot. But there's also the human component, not just the pill component, but the human component.
Yeah, it's a very complex system, right? And when you talk about trying to, good luck when you say what we don't know about the brain. I think it's the new horizon. It's the new Wild West. I mean, we have just a basic understanding, and we can kind of know if we pull on this lever, this behavior will change, and vice versa. But the true, neurochemistry and exactly what's going on is tough. We were talking with a psychiatrist who's practicing now, and they made the comment about, I think I'd ask them, well, how do you know the medication's going to work? How do you know how to match their symptoms with the medication? How you know it's going to work? And his answer was, you don't. A third of the time it works great, and a third of the time it doesn't do much, and a third of the time it's, we better change this really quick. And it's scary, to think about that kind of success rate with your brain, so.
and being a doctor and having the responsibility of your client or your patient, there's a lot of, pressure. So I will say it takes certain types of individuals to go into that field, because you don't want to get too consumed with oh gosh, like I gave this person medication that had adverse effects I didn't know. I thought it was going to help them. You don't want it to get to you. You want to make sure you don't stay in that self-blame headspace. And I was told by a doctor, not a psychiatrist, but a doctor, just for advice, learning to have a balance between your work life and your personal life. Don't bring the work with you home, and don't bring home with you to work, and just try to have that division. Yeah.
And as a perfectionist, you're like, that's the easiest thing in the world for me to do. No problem. I think I could do that.
Oh, yeah, I think I can do that. But the only thing is, I am a huge empath. And so I feel everything. And when I see someone struggling, I'm like sitting there with them struggling as well. So I'll get there where I learn a few tools here and there to help me manage.
Yeah. And I think transitions are really important too. So like, as silly as it seems, like when I was, in grad school and I was working a full-time job and I was raising a family, like we just started having children, my wife and I found it really important to have like, specific transitions between the two, right? Because you don't want to be the work guy at school. You don't want to be the school guy when you need to be dad. You don't want to be dad when you're, And so even as simple as like our house was brick, and touching the brick as you're walking in was something about signaling to my brain, like we're going into this mode, driving a certain way. Yeah, you can kind of like inform yourself. There was a specific tree outside the Department of Education. I would like touch it. It had this really weird bark or whatever. Now I'm in school mode, and music can be really important for that too. Certain songs that you listen to in different settings, and just signaling to the brain in different ways. This is what we do now. So a cue, exactly right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So when if that comes true for you, and you say and you do become with the holistic, we talked a little bit about considering the whole person, but how would a holistic psychiatrist function differently than what we have today in terms of psychiatry? Like, what is your vision for that?
My vision is practicing in a way that the medication would be the last resort. And I know that's kind of controversial and there will be different opinions on it, but I want to make sure, like, as a future physician, that I get to the why and the root. And sometimes the root is there's maybe an imbalance going on, and that a medication could help balance it out. But I want to make sure I exhaust everything before giving something that will alter the chemistry of someone's brain, because there's both pros and cons, and it really just depends. So what I mean by like a holistic psychiatrist is just making sure you're getting the whole picture of someone and figuring out, okay, research wise, what will be the best approach to this specific person, and not just like, oh, well, I have other patients who have this condition, therefore I'm going to use the same medication for them. So yeah, that's pretty much what I envision for holistic psychiatry, but also exploring other forms of medicine, like mindfulness, like having a little bit of therapeutic intervention in there. Just they say a combination of medication and therapy is proven to be really effective because it's addressing multiple parts of someone and not just like the biological part. So yeah.
Yeah, not to turn this into a commercial, but this podcast is sponsored by Anew Behavioral Health. And one of the things I think that Anew does well is we have a team on each client, right? So it's not just a psychiatrist come and go. That person also has a therapist, has a case manager, has a nurse, and there's multiple components to their care. And so a lot of times Anew's prescribers will go into the chart, look at the therapy notes, and some of the prescriptions will even be for increase their case management or add an extra therapy session a week, things like that. So there are other interventions than just the medication because it's a connected, and I mean, other agencies do that, but that integrative care, I think it just takes the outcomes to a whole nother level, and kind of seems like what you're talking about. So, yeah. So I have a question for you. So, I mean, right now, obviously, being young, having had these personal experiences, it sounds like a lot of what you're bringing to the table in terms of your future practice will be from your personal experience. And there seems to be, it just seems to be a shift, really, a change between, like I said, like my generation into the younger generation about, mental health and addiction and their awareness of those issues. And especially on the heels of the pandemic, it looks like the needs are going up, not down, right? So we have a greater understanding, we have more awareness, but yet the needs are going up. So what do you think it is about your generation, and what do you think that we're going to have to change as providers to be able to meet the needs of this next generation that's coming through? Like, what's different about your group, and how are we going to have to adjust to be able to help them better, in your opinion?
I would say for my generation, the difference is living and growing up in the world of social media. Um, it literally has been said that our brains are not evolved to constantly see negative news all the time. Because back in the day, quote unquote, there wasn't like Instagram or Twitter. You would receive your news either like via a phone call, or you would watch what the daily news or the newspaper, whatever was locally going on, you would hear about it. But these days, you're hearing not just about what's locally going on, you're hearing about what's happening an ocean away from you. And most of the time, it's pretty sad, heavy things that are going on. And that takes a toll. And definitely with the pandemic, the needs have gone up. And I think that's just because of the uncertainty of not knowing, well, what's going to happen? What is my life going to look like? And a lot of people are losing motivation with their goals, especially with school. If you're a teenager and you're in that transition period between finishing high school and going off to college, I think a lot of students are in a situation where they don't know where they want to go because of the pandemic and not knowing how things are going to look. So in terms of how can we really help people in my age group, I would say having more mental health days and just allowing people to process, because we're receiving information at such a fast rate that we can't even process. So if there's a way that we can change the curriculum in schools to allow more mental health days, and also developing emotional intelligence. If younger kids can start learning about their emotions and how to articulate their emotions, maybe it'll help them speak up more when they're not feeling too great. So I would say, like, if we could change the curriculum, which I know would be very difficult to do, but
well, you'll be a doctor someday. You just tell them to do it, and then they'll do it.
I can write a doctor's note and say, okay.
There you go. And your mom's in education, right? So you can work on the curriculum level. So, yeah, I mean, not to be extreme about it, but like the social media stuff, I mean, I don't know. I'm going to sound like the oldest person in the world, but like, should we just turn that off? Like I mean, I know this dream of this wonderfully connected society, and you don't want to deprive people of information, but it feels like the opposite has come true, where we're more disconnected, and those forums are being used either intentionally or at least creating harm, right? Because like we work with bullying a lot, and it used to be you get bullied at school and you go home, you get a break. You go on the weekends, you get a break, and now the bullying never stops, right? Because you log on, So I don't know. I mean, I know that's dramatic and probably not even possible, but I just don't know if this is a healthy thing for us to have, and whether we should be considering ways to limit that. Because you were talking about more mental health days and more time to decompress, and I'm thinking about like, yeah, but if they weren't ingesting the toxin as often, you wouldn't need as much time to filter it out, right? So
right. I think you have a really great point. It would be such an ideal situation if social media didn't have some of the negative impacts that it's already done to youth and even older individuals as well. But I honestly, not to be like negative, but I do feel like we've come. I feel like it's like Pandora's box. We have to figure out a way to adapt. How do we adapt to this change? And that's where I think having, emotional intelligence, but also, like you said, how do we limit? But, that would be difficult to do as well. We can't tell people what to do, but, if there's a way where we can maybe have our devices to where it, shuts off. But I think there are apps out there actually that put a timer on your social media. Yeah.
And I'm a big personal freedom guy, so I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because as soon as I say limit social media, I'm going to say the government shouldn't dictate what you do. You have a right to choice, and those kinds of things. And so it is very difficult. I am curious. So one thing we talk about too. Actually, I was going to say before we move on, another way is to not necessarily turn it off, but to have more balanced conversations. Like your page is overwhelmingly positive, right? And I wish that your page wasn't such an outlier, because when we came across it, it was like, oh wow, this is different. This is a positive spin on everything. And that mirrors the mission of this podcast. We always try to leave with, some hope and some things that people can do. And we want to have a more positive conversation. We don't just want to talk about the struggle. We want to talk about the recovery, right? And so I also think contributing in a more positive way to those forums and having a more balanced conversation is a way to level that out. So in that spirit of leaving people with, advice or steps they can take. So if there are people out there who are dealing with some of the same things that Caitlin had dealt with, right? So thinking about when you were growing up and feeling that anxiety or dealing with that perfectionism, or having, even now I understand, hearing your story about grief and loss and how to deal with that. If there are kids or anybody out there that are kind of feeling similarly to how you felt back then, what would you advise them to do about that? Or what do you wish that you had done different along the way?
I would say finding a medium, whether that be through art, writing, reading, dance, whatever it is, where you can express yourself freely and authentically. Because when you start, like I was talking about putting on a mask, when you start layering those masks, they become heavy after a while. But if you can find a space for yourself, even if that's alone or finding a new group of friends where you can just be yourself, whether you're crying or you're laughing, whatever it is, that can release some of the pressure of perfectionism and anxiety. And also just knowing that sometimes healing can be very isolating in the beginning, because people, you start to change a little bit, and maybe the people around you are not understanding what's going on. Why are you changing? And so I would tell people, don't be afraid of the solitude. It's okay if you have to spend some time on your own. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It just allows you to think a little bit more clearly, get away from all the noise, So, sometimes you have to go silent. And I do have like a post about silence, and, I do believe that it's true. Sometimes you need to go silent in order to gain a little bit more clarity, and that there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. So it's okay.
Yes, yeah. And a lot of that difference is the choice, right? Like if you're choosing to be alone, to reset or calm down those voices or focus on self, it's a lot more empowering than being left alone, right? Where you're desperately trying to connect and everybody's rejecting you and that kind of thing. So, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said for sure. And I think the fact that, especially with people pleasing and taking others' feedback as a feedback mechanism for how I feel internally, cutting down some of those messages allow you to center yourself and really hear your own voice. What do I actually feel about this, regardless of the impact or regardless of whether people agree? Am I happy with it? And that's sort of what you're trying to shoot for, is to be more focused on your experience of your situation and not so dependent upon outside feedback. Yeah, no, that's great. And I love what you said the first thing about finding a safe medium, because I think downloading is so important. I mean, you carry things around day after day and you have no way to get the inside out and know where that for that to go. I think that's one of the primary benefits of therapy. It's a safe space to download. I've had sessions where people I call it chewing up. They chew up the time, where I don't have to do much except to sit there and go, okay, tell me some more. All right. And they just go for an hour, and I haven't done much, and they go, I feel so much better. And I think about that, like it wasn't anything you got from me. It was just that opportunity to put that out there. Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so to close up, I do want to hear about your pages, but my wife will be very proud of me. I've gone this entire time and not talked about where you're doing your education. So, yeah, because you talk about people pleasing and really, really going for it. You've chosen a pretty prestigious institution to continue your studies. So where are you at nowadays?
I am getting my master's at Duke University School of Medicine.
Very cool. We just met, and I'm so proud of you. Duke is like one of my favorite schools.
It definitely is a dream come true because with all the self doubt, I never would have expected that door opening, but it did, and here I am. So
look what amazing things can happen when you get out of your own way, right? And don't doubt yourself into a corner and take chances and put yourself out there. So. Generally, have they been supportive of your focus on holistics and you feel like, yeah.
One thing I do really like about their program is they care a lot about mental health and physical health. There's a lot of emphasis on learning about mindfulness and how to have a balance. They really built that into the curriculum, which is why I think if we start that at a younger age, then kids can develop it and develop some tools to help them. So yeah, I really like the school, and who knows, maybe for future endeavors,
Yeah, no, it's just a personal thing. And I'll make a joke about, if it becomes overwhelming on the academic side, you can always go watch some super high level basketball because that's what I'm into Duke for, is that. So of course, like everybody else. Yeah, of course. And their football team's getting good. So, you get double edged there. So how do we find you? How do folks find your content and join your page? Yeah, how do we find you?
So I am on Instagram at Cait's Wings. Sounds like Cait's Wings with a C. So CAITS Wings. And I also have a Twitter, which is the same handle name. So if you like Twitter, I'm also on there as well. And look out for some time later this year for potential release of something to be published. Yeah. So yeah, just keep a lookout for that.
Is this music? Is this art? Can you at least share the medium?
Yes, a book.
Okay. All right. And it was the intention Cait Swings, or is it Cait's Wings?
Cait's Wings.
Cait's Wings. Okay. So that's
it just, it reads because I couldn't really put like a comma. So
I didn't know if you were taking a swing at the thing or if it was your wings because of your healing journey, and I wasn't sure which
Yes, it's definitely wings. I love butterflies, so I was inspired by butterflies. Yeah.
All right. Well, and as people, and so as sort of to wrap up too, as people think about engaging with your content, do you want to talk a little bit about, what your hope is there, or what your intention is, what you're putting the content out for? Like, what's the purpose?
Absolutely. So my goal is for people to feel like they can resonate with something, whether it's something that's more joyful and uplifting or something that's a little bit more raw. And I want people to feel less alone and know that, okay, it's okay to feel these things. It doesn't make you abnormal. It doesn't make you crazy, quote unquote. It just means you're human. And taking time to slow down and process your emotions will really help you go further. And that's what my page is for, is just using my writing and my creativity to help people feel less alone. So, yeah.
No, and it resonated with us. I know when we found it, we talk about that safe space. It did feel like a very safe and affirming space, and it wasn't so locked on to like one issue. It was sort of like all are welcome. You know what I mean? If you're feeling this,
no matter what space you're in, come on in. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. So, and speaking of that and being welcoming, we hope you feel welcome here. I'm so thankful you took the time to do this podcast. I mean, it was amazing to hear your story, and you shared a little bit more than I even knew. And so I just appreciate you putting that out there, because we get a lot of feedback on this. And like I said, the more individual it is, like I already know there's people who are going to reach out to us and say, oh, Cait said this, and that's exactly what I went through, or I'm connecting to what she said. So thank you so much for giving us that authentic look at you and your journey and what you've been dealing with. I appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love connecting with others, and thank you for reaching out to me and just having this amazing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we're going to have to do this again. So now I've got a great excuse. I'm going to load Ian up with a bunch of technical equipment. We'll come down to Duke, and we'll just, we'll find a pretty place on campus. Yeah. And we'll do it there. I'm always down for.
There's so many places on campus, so many places.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. And so I'm always down for a road trip, especially down that way. So we'll definitely catch up then, and we'll do that soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And then for you guys watching, just remember it's Cait's Wings. You can find her on Instagram. You can find her on Twitter. And we will definitely include in the show notes ways to connect with you. And we will definitely be looking forward to that book and anything else that you produce. Please pass that along and we'll make sure everybody can get access to it through our site. So thank you, Cait, for being here. Thank you guys for listening. And until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Thanks so much. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.